All right, we're ready for the long. Okay, I believe it is 6 o'clock and 1 minute after, so we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. I thought I saw her pull up. I don't know. Okay, we will call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the pledge. And Mr. Stallings, will you lead us in the pledge tonight? We will now have the approval of the agenda.
So, second.
Okay, it's been moved and second. And of course, we will do a verbal vote for that. Dr. Flores? Mr. Tillman?
Aye.
Dr. Wyatt? I gotta look around the room. Ms. Rosales Medina?
Aye.
And Dr. Downey Rogers? Aye. Motion carried. Thank you. Where are you? Where is Ms. Cunningham? She's somewhere. Okay, are there any public comments?
No, there are no comments.
All right. If there are no public comments, then we will proceed into our budget workshop. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. It is very cold right now. So we will thaw out and move forward with our budget workshop.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and good evening, board. As we approach the holiday season, many of us dreams of sugar plums and presents. In fiscal and business, we think about budget. As we approach the holidays, that's when a lot of the work begins, not only with the first interim budget presentation to the board, but also we start to prepare and gather information from the state as we prepare for our own local budget for the next fiscal year. So we are going to walk the board through a bit of information related to our current budget, as well as information related to projections as we move forward to the governor's January budget proposal, which will be coming up shortly. So this evening, we are going to go over a few things. First, we're going to start off with the state budget and fiscal outlook, because the state budget is the source of our revenues predominantly as a portion of our total revenues. And so as the state goes, so does our budget. So we're going to start and give an update on where we're headed there.
Mr. Tillman?
Do you want us to wait to the end to ask questions?
This one is probably, because it's kind of sectioned, so maybe we get to the fund, like when it says funding overview, then we can pause, because it's a little thick.
I asked, could we wait? Does she want us to wait to the end of the presentation to ask questions?
We'll get to a little meat of it, and then we'll pause right there. So, yeah, pause so we don't go too far.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to provide an overview of the general funding model and our current year budget, as well as our multi-year projections and the reserves. We'll talk a bit about our one-time funding that we've received, where we are in terms of our spending and encumbrance. And then we're going to discuss our ongoing budget challenges, and then discuss our next steps. So with that, we'll jump into our fiscal outlook for the state budget. So this graphic was one that I actually stole from Superintendent Tony Thurmond from his presentation at CSBA. I thought it was a great graphic. I replicated it. I think I did as good a job as he did. But the reason why I'm bringing this graphic forward is where I want to start, is really with the 21-22 budget and the initiatives for school transformation that the governor and the legislature made. And so here this graphic demonstrates several of the special programs that, coming out of the pandemic, even though we're still in the midst of the pandemic, there are certain initiatives that the governor and legislature thought were important to really support not only our educational programs, but the whole child as we think of the social emotional needs of our students coming out of this pandemic. So I won't go through each one of them, but the real salient ones are the expanded learning program that provides additional funding to support a longer day, both before and after school when combined with the instructional day. The universal TK and state preschool programs, which is going to broaden the availability of our early education programs. Currently, in statewide, we serve about 1 million students through our TK and state preschool programs. However, there are 3 million more students that are sitting at home that do not have access to these programs. So these investments will provide those opportunities for the students over a 4-year phase-in plan. Additionally, our A through G completion improvement rate, there's a limited one-time funding to support that need. Professional development for our educators. We understand that high-quality educators are in high demand. There's a teacher shortage, and so we want to make sure that we're providing those professional development opportunities through our educator effectiveness grants and other PD opportunities. And then near and dear to my heart, coming from child nutrition background, the universal meal programs which will begin next year in 2022-23, which will provide reimbursement beyond the federal program to ensure that all students have access to meals at no cost. So diving in, we're going to take a look at the most recent projections from the Legislative Analyst Office. So the Legislative Analyst is a nonpartisan entity that provides financial projections as it relates to the state budget, including fiscal outlook for the state legislature to form or make decisions about as they're negotiating with the governor through the budget proposal process. So as we look, the state revenues have surged, and this has resulted in a surplus to the state of $31 billion currently. That could go higher, but as of the Legislative Analyst Report of November 17th, $31 billion was the surplus projected. Of that, we are funded through the Proposition 98 guarantee, and this is the primary basis for education funding. With the $31 billion, it's projected that our Prop 98 guarantee will increase by $11.6 billion. Of that funding, 5.35% COLA is projected, which for our district represents about an additional $16 million beyond what we have in our current budgeted projections. Additional ongoing funding of $9.5 billion is available. However, we do not know how those funds will be distributed. The important piece to remember about this is, going back to the previous graphic, is there are a lot of investments that the governor and legislature made. Some of those investments were underfunded. So there is an expectation that a portion of this $9.5 billion in ongoing funds will be used to help fund those programs so that there is a sustainable programs going forward. The remaining amount, we are not sure how those will be distributed. There is advocacy amongst the state and stakeholder groups to put the additional funding towards the base grant for school districts. Because, as you know, with the San Bernardino city budget, as well as a lot of districts, we do not struggle from a budget standpoint on our supplemental concentration side. We struggle on our base side of the budget. And so that's where we talk about the structural deficit. And so more dollars to the base will really have an impact and help alleviate our structural deficit over the long term. In addition, the governor proposes an additional $10.2 billion in one-time uses. Again, this is at the discretion of the governor, and following the governor's proposal, there'll be negotiations with the legislature. So there will be more information as we move closer to the May revise, and negotiations continue with the governor and the legislature on what those dollars will come to us as. And then finally, this is a very important point. Proposition 98 reserves, which are mandated under Senate Bill 2, requires that as the state makes certain investments into that reserves, which for us over the next 2 years will be $4.2 billion, a cap on district reserves is implemented, and that is a 10% cap. So we are in the phase where that cap will be implemented beginning in 2022-23. So this is going to be an important conversation that we have with the board as we project out next year's budget, because there are some things that, options that we have available to us. And so we'll bring that back to the board for further discussions on how the board would like us to handle that. So this chart shows the projected growth from the Legislative Analyst Office for our Proposition 98 minimum funding guarantee. So we can see the budget is looked at in 3 years. So they go to the current, the future year, which is 22-23, the current year, and the prior year, and they true up where the revenues have come in. And so we can see by the blue bar on the graph that the state revenues in 2020-21 were 93.4 million, but because of the true up, they've increased to 95.3 billion. In addition, when we look to 21-22, we can see that similarly, we had in the state adopted budget revenues of 93.7 million, but that increased with the true up to 103.7 million. Most importantly, as you compare that 21-22 blue bar, sorry, I'm trying to get it there. The blue bar there, as we move over to the 22-23 projection, that is where that $11.6 billion increase in our Prop 98 guarantee is recognized. So that is the, I'm sorry.
You know, yeah.
Yeah, so the one,
Is it
Okay.
reflected,
So-
is it reflected on
I
the
know, we're just talking.
105.3?
so the, yes, so the 105.3, that is what it's projected to grow to next year.
And that's based on 11 point,
Yeah, so if you look at the difference between the 93.7 right here with the blue bar, and if you grow to the 105.3, that's 11.6.
okay.
So we're going to pause right here for the questions. We'll start with you, Mr. Tillman, then I'll come back over to you, Mrs. Rosales Medina. I think you had a question as well.
So I have a number of questions. Where it says Prop 98 guarantee projected to grow by 11.6 billion.
Correct.
That's, so tell me if I'm wrong, because normally what I do is, I've been doing this for a long time, but normally what I do is just we have 50,000 students. I think throughout California, they said it's like 6.8 million students, right?
6.1 and dropping, yes.
Right, so if we take the 50,000 divided by the 6.8 million, that gives you 0.007. So if I say 0.007 times 11.6 billion, is it safe to say that's a ballpark of how much money we'll get?
I would say that's creative way, but not necessarily. And I'll provide some context. Because if we look at that original graphic, there's a lot of categorical investments that the legislature and the governor are making now. So in terms of the dollars and how they're distributed to us, they could come to us in terms of categorical programming. They could come to us in form of the LCFF. At this point, with the raw numbers, we don't know that.
That's not my, that's
Yeah.
what, wasn't
Okay.
that wasn't
I'm
my
sorry.
question
Sorry.
though. If I look at it in terms of we're going to get that certain amount of money, we just don't know how it's going to come to us. But is it comfortable to say that we'll get the 0.007 times 11.6 billion?
I'm not comfortable saying that.
Well, I can
Yeah.
tell you, I like to
Yeah.
predict stuff. That's what normally happens.
Okay.
And
No, and I would say that that's a reasonable calculation.
And-
I understand that.
And another reason why I say that is because our district is in a unique and a good predicament because we actually benefit from LCFF more than a lot of other districts throughout the state.
Correct.
And even in the presentation I was in at CSBA this past weekend, a gentleman got up and had a concern about LCFF because a lot of the districts don't get as much funding as we do.
Correct.
So it's actually safe to say that we'll get at least our minimum representation just based on that factor. But we'll see what happens.
Sure. No, absolutely.
But even if we do the point out, and I say that for the viewing public, but if you do 0.007 times 11, 11 billion. 11, well, it's actually 11 billion 600 million, right?
Yes, correct.
I don't have a calculator with me, but yeah. It's about 31 million.
So I would just say that a portion of that 11.6, if you notice the ongoing funding is showing 9.5.
Right.
The difference of 2.1, that is to fund the COLA increase.
Right. So I understand. So, but I just want to make sure we're clear. It's a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
And then on the projected 5.3% cost of living, do you have an amount that I don't? What is the 5.3%? Is it 5.3% times the entire $700 million budget, or what do you multiply that by?
No, so that is actually, that COLA is provided to our LCFF, so our base, and then as a result of that increase, our supplemental and concentration grants increase as well. Then the governor does also provide the COLA to other programs, for example, special education.
Right.
However, the governor does not always provide the full COLA to those programs.
So the number that we are looking at, that this 5.3% COLA is going to affect is what in our district?
So right now, based on what our projections are, we originally had for next year 2.48% COLA. So the additional to get us up to the 5.35 would provide an additional 16 million, and that would continue to grow. I think.
So the total for COLA would be what for 22, 23?
Oh, I don't have that figure, but I would say that's going to be closer to about 26 million.
And is that number separate from this previous number that we talked about? 11.6 billion? Yes.
So the 2.1 of that 11.6 is to fund the COLA up to 5.35. So
Gotcha.
that's why you get down to the 9.5 billion
why I asked.
for the remaining.
And then the additional ongoing funding, it is 9.5 billion, you said, right?
Correct, and that's ongoing.
Right, but if we did the same calculation, 0.007 times 9, a lot of zeros. That's like $66 million, right? But like you said, we don't know how it's going to come to us, right?
Correct.
And is that money separate from the previous items we talked about?
That is separate. Yeah. That is additional.
And it is ongoing.
Correct.
We just, again, we don't know how it's going to come to us. What I am encouraged about, when I went to the CSBA meeting, they did say they had the treasurer there and O'Connell, who used to be a legislator, and then Kevin Gordon, and then I don't know who the other guy. Oh, they had some guy from the Riverside School District. Yeah. But anyway, they all agree that they're going to try to encourage the governor as much as possible to put the money in base grant and not go back to where we used to be when they used to do a lot of stuff in categorical.
Correct.
When they do categorical, we don't have control of the funding. And and I hope we're expressing to our lobbyists, this is when they come into play now, that the major concern for me, and I'll have my hand up, they wouldn't call on me, but the major concern for me is it would be a tragedy if you got $100 million of extra money in a school year, but because they're forcing you to spend the money on new programs, then you'd have to increase class sizes, lay off some people, or move people into different programs and cause chaos in your district because they've dictated how you have to spend your new money.
Correct.
So what we should encourage in the conversation should be, you have to at least give us enough money in base to allow us to mitigate the declining enrollment, which is happening basically across the whole state, so we can balance our budget.
Correct.
That to me is an important point that we should, as a district should be sending to our legislators, and then especially the lobbies that we pay. That's the message we should be getting to them.
So he can give you, based on that conversation, and this related to this, he can give you a high-level update of what that looked like when we were talking with our legislative lobbyists, because we meet with them on Monday about the rolling. The 3-year rolling.
So Mr. Tillman, you make a lot of great points, and absolutely, and that's the advocacy that's happening now, and I'm encouraged by that because we seem to have a seat at the table with the legislature on these issues. So most importantly, what we're seeing is that really where we're struggling, aside from the base, is the fact that, and I'll use our district as an example, in the midst of this pandemic, we lost over 2,000 students. Based on our historical trend, which is normally 0.5%, we lost the equivalent of 8 years of enrollment in a single year. That is devastating to a district. Now, we haven't felt that because we had the hold harmless, but we are going to feel it next year. And we're going to show that in the information. So the conversations that we're having, both with our advocacy, but also with our legislature, and we met with Senator Leyva to talk about these issues surrounding the idea of a hold harmless or a soft landing. Now, with legislature, hold harmless is a bad word because it doesn't solve the problem. It pushes it out another year, and that's not what they want to do. So Mike Fine from FICMAT has actually had very substantive conversations, and the Assembly Oversight Committee actually met today, on November 30th, to talk about this exact issue. So there are a lot of options on the table. One of those options is a soft landing, which basically, like our unduplicated pupil percentages, we don't take that percentage that we obtain in year one on its own. It's averaged over a 3-year period. So if you have a decline, it's averaged and you have a soft landing. Mm-hmm. So those conversations are happening, and I'm happy to say not only at our at our level, but also with our legislature at the state level and with the governor. And so we are getting, I think, some ground. What I've heard is that because of the timing of the governor's budget proposal, there wasn't enough time to put in an enrollment ADA sort of initiative, but they imagine that between when the governor presents his proposal and through the May revise and ultimate budget adoption, that there will be something in there to address the ADA and enrollment issues that we're all facing.
And let me just say, as to buy more time, doing one more year whole harmless wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then on the Prop 98 reserve, expected to grow by $4.2 billion in the next 2 years, triggering the local reserve cap. How does that actually affect us?
So,
Meaning that, does that mean that our ending balance, it can only be a certain number, or?
correct.
So what does it mean?
So what that means is our ending balance can only be 10%. It's capped at 10%. So if we are over that, then we have to take steps to get our reserves or our ending balance below that. And so there are some options. We don't have to find ourselves in a situation with spending it down. There are options that we can take. But the challenge is in this environment is when you look at our general fund, where is a lot of the money that we're getting?
Because it's an ESSER
The
1, 2, and
one-time,
3.
the ESSER.
Right.
So that's going to be significant. So it's unlikely and unreasonable that we are going to be able to right size and get below that cap. So that'll be part of the conversations that we have to have with the board in terms of what the opportunities, because there are opportunities to address it.
And I do want to say that I hope we don't lose sight of the fact that we still have one-time money that has to be spent, and some of it is use it or lose it. Mm-hmm. So I hope, because we see this additional money coming in, that we continue on the line of finding ways to spend on one-time money so that we don't lose the ability to spend that money. So, and it's complicated because on the one hand, you're worried about incurring too many costs that are ongoing, but until we get this next fiscal year. But I really think we should still be emphasizing finding ways to spend that one-time money. It'd be a tragedy to let that money go unspent, especially now because we're going to be in this Prop 90 reserve issue. That money could actually hurt you if you haven't spent it already. So I
Yeah.
hope you guys are looking
Yeah,
at that timing.
and so that's a great point. You stole my thunder a little bit. We were going to talk about it a little bit later.
So can I
Yeah.
can I just get let me let some of the other board members
Well, I got
jump in
one
so
more-
you don't have to go
I
ahead.
got one more.
Okay, because Mr. Tillman, I need to kind of
Yeah,
rotate
I got
it
one more.
around.
Well, it helped.
No, I will come back to you just to get them to
okay.
jump in if you have a
And
ton
then,
of questions.
and then finally, I want to say when we do these presentations, showing that it's a projected 5.3% doesn't mean anything to me. And even if you make a caveat that says it's 5.3% and the rough projection is 20 million or 30 million, that's better than seeing 5.3% because it doesn't mean anything in context. It's the same thing with even the way they described it at the presentation was better. They said the state has a $30 billion surplus. 40% of that goes to schools. And when you look at the 40% going to schools, then you could extrapolate what that number is to our district. You should have listed on the presentation what the number is. We shouldn't be afraid to do it because you have folks out there who are doing the numbers themselves. So the only people that end up not knowing the numbers are the board members because you guys haven't informed us.
So are you saying, so what are you recommending?
That you guys show numbers on here.
So,
So-
Instead of percentage points.
so,
Yes.
so we certainly can look at that. The challenge is, and I don't know any school district that puts the actual impacts to their budget for public consumption
Right.
until we get more clarity. Because again, there are some nuances that have to sort out.
But the reality is, Mr. Sullivan, you can extrapolate what the number is. If you want to take your philosophy, you wouldn't list any numbers. You would say, I'm not going to tell you how much the surplus is because if I do that, you're going to know. Because as soon as you put down $31 billion and you say 40% that's going to schools, and then you know that our district is 50,000 students, which makes us 0.007 of the total population, then you know the ballpark number is that number. Now, I agree. You can say, we're not sure it's going to be the exact amount. We're not sure if a lot of money will be restricted or not restricted. We can have that conversation. Sure. But it's not a bad thing for me to walk out of here saying, man, I got over $100 million of new money coming. It could be a nightmare for me if the governor and the legislature decides to create new programs like 3-year-olds getting educated and doing stuff that we don't have control over and encourage new costs for us. But I still think it helps us to see the number on the paper. Thank you.
Mr. Stallis-Medina?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify on slide 4 where you mentioned universal meals. I just wanted to note what the difference is because it seemed like you when you mentioned it, there's something else coming in. So I just wanted to better understand what you were referencing.
Great question. So most districts participate in the National School Lunch Program, which is a federal program that provides reimbursement for meals that we serve to our students. For when they're qualifying for free meals, we receive a higher reimbursement than our reduced price students and then our paid students. So what this proposes is that we provide meals to all students, regardless of what their eligibility status is for the federal program. So what the state is proposing is that they will make us whole because our reimbursement is so small for example, for paid students that we receive from the federal government. Where we make that up is when the student pays for the meal. They'd like to eliminate that process so that we can provide that meal to the paid student and we would receive whatever federal reimbursement that is due to us for providing that meal to a paid student. And then the state would come in and they would provide an additional to bring us up to whole for what we would normally receive for our free qualified students. Typically, that's not been the case. Historically, the state will provide just for free and reduced students a very small reimbursement per meal reimbursement, which is equivalent to probably about a quarter.
Okay. And I think that's where I wanted to clarify because I was under the assumption that we were providing free meals for all of our
Correct.
students regardless
Correct.
of income. So then so I just want to maybe make sure, do we provide?
We do. So
Okay.
so we're under community eligibility option. So this won't impact us in the way that it will impact other districts.
Okay.
For example, because of our population that we serve of students, we are eligible to receive reimbursement at 100%. So So this won't necessarily impact us. Where this does have impacts on us is when you provide universal free meals. You can no longer collect meal applications, and that is the primary driver for our income data for our household for determining our low income status for unduplicated pupil percentage. When you take the meal application away because there's no meal tied to it, and you go to this alternate income survey form, you generally don't get the return rate from families, and that's where districts struggle, because then while they know that they're serving those populations of students, the numbers in terms of their funding, numbers for funding purposes, do not reflect that.
Okay, okay, thank you for clarifying, and I just wanted to make sure that we were providing, and free and reduced lunch free lunch for all of our students regardless of income.
Dr. Flores?
Thank you, Mr. Tillman, for asking all of those cogent questions. It's really, really important. And I want to also support that we put numbers. We are the governing board. It is our fiduciary responsibility to know it. And also, it's public money. And we should be transparent with, the amounts, projected amounts. I mean, you can put a range. I mean, you don't have to exactly, because, we can put a range for that so that our public knows and we're being honest and transparent. I think that's really, really key. And I just wanted to comment that when Mr. Tillman asked you further questions about the 5.35, cost of living adjustment, you first said 16 million, and then when he asked you some more, it went up to 26 million. So, that's $10 billion more. So we need to know, that and where that came from. And, I don't even remember what question you asked, Danny, about that.
So if I
you
can
remember?
clarify,
No? Uh-huh.
so I can explain the difference. So when we think about the 5.35% COLA, the 16 million that I referenced was above what we already have budgeted for COLA, because the state had already provided a previous COLA of 2.48. So to get us to that 5.35, that's an additional 16 million. So when
the total is
correct,
26 million?
correct,
Okay,
correct, yeah.
all right. So that would have been helpful. I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't asked that question, Danny. And then I have a couple other questions. Do we know what our projected demographics are for TK, possible TK, and our San Bernardino City Unified Boundaries by chance?
So that very timely question as well. We are actually working on those projections, because
okay.
as part of building out the universal TK, it's not the field of dreams. We don't build it and hope they come. We are working on projections to determine
Right.
what are those populations, because as it phases in 2-month increments. So it increases the birth dates by 2 months over the next 3 years. And so we have to get very granular in terms of that data to say, okay, not only do we need to know how many are TK age, we need to know what month they turn 5 in to determine which phase they're eligible to participate in.
So not only that, but then just a projection of how many teachers we're going to need.
Correct.
The
Yeah.
costs. Do we have the space?
Exactly.
All those things. Our paraprofessionals, are we going to train them because they haven't, been in TK? There's so many implications.
Correct.
I'm sure you guys are thinking about it, but
We're already having those
I think
conversations.
about all of that in my mind. And then the other thing is, how are we going to brand it? I think branding is really key, and staying on message. I was at, I don't have my phone with me. I forgot my phone. Can you believe I forgot my phone? But anyway, I saw a branding that was really incredible, and it was just simple, and I can't remember it right now, so I'm not going to say it, but it was 2 phrases, and they were so catchy, It was just amazing, And so we have to do something like that. And I'm sure we're going to do it on the radio, in our churches, and our preschools. To let people know that we have spaces
Yeah.
available. And I hope that we can pick up the 2,000, or I'm sure, because there's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids, so that was, okay, so you're gonna update us on that, right? And where you're at?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. I hear what you're asking, Mr. Tillman, regarding the projection of what the allocation would be for the district. And I agree with Mr. Sullins that until we get definitive numbers, I don't think we can just make a calculation and say, well, let's take 0.5, 0.7%. I hear you, but let us go back and think it through. I understand where you're coming from with that, but the only question is, I'm not sure if we can say definitively, because in most cases, most districts wait until those dollars, until the governor's budget is solidified. And you're right, they typically may have an idea at the state level, but we don't want to make assumptions. So that's why I agree with Mr. Sullins that, what numbers, what do we use to calculate that? So, but again, we'll take it into consideration, I think, and we'll look at and see if that's a possibility.
Madam President?
So, yes, hold on, Mr. Chairman, because I thought Dr. Flores was turning
Right.
the page.
I have one more,
And
but you
then
can
you
go ahead
addressed
and
her.
ask that question.
No, let's just stay with the order, only because he started talking to him on that same question, but you
okay,
finish
all right.
yours.
Well, I'll just defer to Mr. Tillman.
So do you not have another question?
I just wanted to know, how do we know we're gonna have ongoing money, for certain? Additional funding, ongoing funding, 9.5 billion. Is that gonna be every year?
Yes.
Is that gonna be, it is, for the next 2-3 years, or
Forever.
ongoing?
It's ongoing. So
It's gonna be ongoing.
that investment is
Okay,
ongoing.
and how much of that, I know you can't tell me, how much of that are we gonna get?
Well, that's
That's
point.
the
That's
big question.
correct.
I don't want you to tell me, because I
Correct.
know we don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how much of that are we gonna get, so that we can plan out,
It's big.
all the things that we wanna do, and
Yeah.
what do we wanna prioritize, and so forth. Okay.
And I would just add, once the governor's budget proposal is, and it's actually included in our next step, we will be, after that, we will provide a presentation to the board to talk about that governor's proposal and discuss the impacts to our budget.
Okay, great. Okay.
Madam
Roger.
President, this is something that we have done in the past. I'll give you an example. You could be conservative about it. Instead of saying 0.007, you say 0.005. And let's use this as a learning experience. And when the numbers come out, you can tell me if I was wrong. But even on the 9.5 billion, we should get, I did it with the 0.005, ballpark around $47 million. And I say this for this reason. It doesn't make sense for me to be in this meeting right now, and when you tell me the number is $9.5 billion for the state, that I don't know whether it's going to be an extra $975,000 or $47 million. That's a huge difference, Mr. Sullivan, and you're not telling me anything right now. Somebody has to be able to commit to a ballpark number in order for the presentation to make sense. Because if you're not going to do that, I don't need to come to the presentation. If I'm not going to learn that either I'm losing money or getting money. And to be fair, when I thought we didn't have money, I sat there in that dais and begged everyone,
Sure.
including the superintendent, to don't spend ongoing money because we didn't have it. Because I was certain about it. But if I can be certain about the money I don't have, I can be certain about the new money coming. And it's only fair. And there is a way, and we've done it in the past, Madam President, where we actually had, this is the state, because all you're saying is, this is the state number, and this state number means approximately this much to our district locally. That is not, doesn't take rocket science to do that, and it's not irresponsible to do it, and it makes the whole presentation a lot more meaningful to us.
I think they said they would take that under consideration, and then we'll be reminding ourselves too, because we do question sometimes projections. We don't, it just depends on what we're getting. Sometimes we get a projection, and then it's like, is this a true projection? Is this not? So if we can take that and maybe document it as ranges or
We're not
just be
saying no.
clear. Yeah, right.
No, Mr. Tillman,
Exactly.
we're not saying no.
Exactly.
We're saying that if you've done that in the
Exactly.
past, this is not something that we're
Exactly.
familiar with. But What we're saying is we'll go back,
Yes.
and if there's a way for us to calculate that, absolutely, we have no problem with that.
Correct.
And
So
then
we'll be able to come back with that. We have no problems with that.
present it in that
Mr.
manner.
Tillman, I would like you to come to my presentations.
Yeah, all of us would like to be here. Okay, so we're gonna pick it up from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Okay.
looked, did you,
I'm sorry.
were you good at
Yeah,
this point?
I just have one very
Okay.
quick question. So looking at this other chart, 93.4, 93.7, that's total revenues, right?
Correct. Well, that is the Proposition 98. So of the state revenues, we're in a test one for our revenues, Prop 98. So we get essentially 40 cents of every general fund dollar. So that's what that equates to, the 93.4 and the 93.7.
And that usually doesn't vary very much. It doesn't change, fluctuate very much. That goes based off of ADA enrollment.
No, so the Proposition 98 guarantee is actually a formula based. So there's 3 tests that the state engages in. So if we're in a test 1 period, so what that means is based on the Prop 98 guarantee formula in a test 1 scenario, we are entitled to 40 cents on every dollar. Now, if we were in a test 2 or a test 3, if we see declines, if we see declines in per capita income and attendance, then we sort of, there are different scenarios in which we get funded. So for example, the test 3, when the state is doing poorly, then our revenues or Prop 98 and the monies that come to districts will do poorly as well. So we share the pain when the state budget is not doing well. So, and I'll just add one thing. So to your question about whether it varies very much, it does vary, and I'll give you the example. On 2020, 2021, and 21-22, you have the 2 blue bars. Those blue bars are what the Prop 98 guarantee was projected to be in those years based on the enacted state budget for this fiscal year. The orange bar, now that we're looking towards the 22-23 budget year, the orange bar is that true up to say, no, we're actually not going to have revenues of 93.4 for 2020-21. We actually had $95.3 billion in Prop 98 guarantees. So when you have that difference, that comes to us from the prior and current years, that comes to us as one-time dollars.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the blue bar is the projections that you had done in previous years.
That the state had done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the orange is the actual money that we ended up
Correct,
getting for
correct.
that year and so forth.
Yeah.
So you're saying that for 2022-23, you're taking what the projection was in 2021-2022, which was 93.7,
Correct.
and you're adding the 11.6,
Correct.
which is
11.6 billion.
which is the additional for the COLA.
No, the 11.6 billion is the increase to the Prop 98 in total.
Oh, yes,
A
yes,
portion of 11.6 goes to COLA.
yes. Okay. So then you are, so then the 105.3 becomes a projection.
So yes, that's what's projected for 2022-23. So if we were sitting at this table next year, that 105.3 would likely be the blue bar, and then we would have a new orange bar. That would either be lower or higher depending on where the state budget trued up.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
I think we're good.
All right. Keeping me on my toes. All right. So the next slide is just an overview. When we look at our general fund, what are the type of funding sources? So we have our unrestricted, which is primarily made up of our base LCFF revenue, which is $432.7 million. We do receive other state funding, local funds, including donations, grants. We get unrestricted lottery revenues. We get mandated cost reimbursements. So that's what makes up that unrestricted portion of the overall unrestricted general fund. When we look at the supplemental concentration, those are dollars that are generated by our foster youth, our English learners, and our low-income students. So those are dollars that, based on our unduplicated pupil percentage, those are dollars that we get above and beyond to provide improved or increased services for those student populations. Okay? So it's important to note that those funds have to be used to support or principally serve those student populations. That's what they're designated for. So the unrestricted and the supplemental concentration, those combined make up our overall unrestricted general fund budget. On the right side, we have our restricted budget, and that is, again, those dollars that are assigned for specific programs and services, our special education, when we think about our IDEA funds for special education, when we think about our one-time funds for ESSER and our AB 86 funds, those are restricted because there are prescribed uses for those funds. We just cannot spend those dollars on anything. So they have to be reported and tracked on the restricted side of the budget. And that combined revenue is $358.7 million for the district. So this next graphic really kind of lays it out just exactly what I shared previously, where we see general fund revenues, combined general fund revenues of 971 million, 971.7 million. So if we look to the right, that's the unrestricted general fund. Of that total general fund, 613 million is on the unrestricted side. The predominant amount is coming from LCFF funds. As I mentioned earlier, we are dependent on the state budget for our revenues in large part, and we can see that illustrated here. And then we receive additional smaller amounts for our federal, other state and local funds, projected at $13.1 million. What's important, and this is kind of where we've discussed our structural deficit. When we look at the base funding of 432.7, those are the costs that we use to essentially open the doors to provide our core services. Well, once we've funded those core services, we also have to fund the unfunded obligations on the restricted side of the budget. Those are predominantly special education, local contribution, and our 3% required contribution to routine restricted maintenance. So that $80.4 million comes out of the base, and we move it over to fund those underfunded programs. So that's where you see our base turn upside down in terms of creating that structural deficit. Because to support our base or core operations and support that local contributions to those restricted programs, we do not have enough in our base funding to support all of those obligations.
He's gonna go two more and then.
Okay. I'm on the next section,
you're
so I
to-
didn't know if we wanted to stop for
Okay.
questions.
First interim. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Flores.
So, Mr. Sullins, just to clarify, we are having to, out of the 66.3 million that we get in federal funds for special ed, do you know how much that is?
Correct. So of the dollars that we receive, the 66.3 is not specifically all special education.
So I'm
It's-
asking, do you know
correct.
how much it is?
I do not off the top of my head. I don't know if Janet, if you have the actual,
So.
we can get that information.
So we are having to increase, besides whatever the feds give us, we're having to increase 57.5 million?
Correct.
Wow.
So, and that's a great point to illustrate. As we look at, I think nationwide, as we see enrollment declines, the enrollment for students requiring additional services and supports is actually increasing. So that's where you see the rising cost, and we know to provide these additional services, it costs more money than what we typically.
We really need to lobby Congress because this is ridiculous. I mean, they need to be we need to be funded
Yeah.
for their mandates. I mean, period. Yeah. Thank you. I hope that we can get our lobbyists to do that.
Well, again, special education has been an issue for a long time, so
Yeah.
the encroachment is huge.
And I would just say,
So
But
I
I mean-
agree. We agree with that,
Yeah.
but that's a formula, I think,
Yeah.
Harold, going back to the 1979
Yeah,
or
yeah.
80, that's a
I realize
funding
that,
formula.
but Congress is allocating money now, and, I mean, and we need to make sure that they realize that, it's encroaching tremendously on us.
correct. And I would just add, we applaud the state because they have stepped up in recent years and provided additional funding from the state portion of funding. So that is a definite move in the right direction. The federal government has not taken those exact steps. However, to your point, Dr. Flores, there was actually included in some of these stimulus packages additional funding for Title I and special education programs.
there was?
But
Oh.
yeah, but as you know, as these dollars get negotiated and pared down, things fall out of there. So we do not expect any additional Title I or special education funding in any of the upcoming or recently passed.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Tillman, and then.
Under the item that you have for types of funding, I think it's important under the first one, Mr. Sulla,
Yeah.
that you include that 58% of our funding comes from property taxes. And the other sources is
Oh, yeah.
32% of federal government. 32%, and the federal government gives us about 9%. So 58% is for property tax and other local sources.
Under unrestricted.
Right. There's three sources. Well, the state gives us 58%, which is property tax and other local sources are 32%. But the reason why I say that because when I see the cost of housing going up and people flipping houses
Yeah.
and people getting equity, that's a good thing for schools.
Correct.
So I think we should just have in there that the role that property taxes play for schools because
So, yeah, no.
So add it.
So I would add a little bit of more context to that. So property taxes going up is absolutely a good thing to any community. Based on the local control funding formula, we are funded based on our specific district identity and population. And so what we need to understand is when the state identifies based on our unique our demographics and statistics, we are allocated or portioned X number in terms of LCFF based on our calculator. Of that, there's a state portion, there's property taxes portion. So as property taxes go up, that actually doesn't necessarily help us as a district from the standpoint that just reduces the amount of state aid that they have to provide us. So when you think of a basic aid district, which is a very affluent area, their property taxes are so high that the state doesn't have any obligation.
I guess to point out,
Yeah.
tell me if I'm wrong on this.
Yeah.
If property values were going down, that would be bad news for
Correct.
schools.
Yeah, any taxes, yeah.
No, that's a huge
Correct.
point. If you're going to include lottery on here, which is very minuscule in terms of
Correct.
funding for schools,
Correct.
you have to have property taxes on here. So,
Well,
I think, and that's because property taxes benefit schools. Now, how they decide to divvy it up, that's a whole other
Yeah.
story. But in the end, if property taxes are going up, in terms of the amount of taxes collected, then that's good for schools.
Yeah.
And I think that should be listed in the
Okay.
in that section. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Ceballos?
So again, just for clarification, I see the 613 million on here, which is composed both of the unrestricted and supplemental concentration fund, right?
Correct.
But then I guess I got lost in the breakdown. So you have the LCFF of 599.9.
Correct. So the LCFF, what makes up that 599.9 million is that base amount and the SNC supplemental concentration. So those are combined. Those are not in addition to the 599. That is the funding broken out. So of that LCFF funding, we get that 599.9. 169.2 million comes from in the form of supplemental concentration dollars, and the 432.7 million comes in the form of base grants.
Okay, and so it's just a little bit different because of the year? because the base 432.7, I guess I'm trying to match it to the unrestricted 44
Oh, yeah.
5.8.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Can you repeat that?
So, I guess I'm getting lost in the amounts. So I'm seeing the LCFF of 599.9 million, and that I see how that's being broken down into
Correct.
the base, into the supplemental and
Yeah.
concentration. But on this other page, page 8, I'm seeing the 445.8
Oh.
million.
I see that.
And that those two added, unrestricted and supplemental and concentration, equals 613 million. But then over here, you do have the 613 million as well. But then it breaks it down where it's not making sense to me.
I got it. Yeah. No. So if we look at the types of funding chart where you referenced the 445.8 million, that is the 13.1 million, which is the federal, other state, and local, and that is the base. That's what makes up that unrestricted side.
It's just the way it's graphed, it doesn't, yeah, it should have been moved over so it can make more sense.
The 432 plus 13, you're saying?
432 plus 13 equals the 445.8 million.
The colors are kind of color coded. It didn't.
Oh,
make
got it.
this
Got it.
succinct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's the graph. It's there, but it's kind of strange.
Okay, and then my other question, so in terms of the federal funds on the restricted general fund side, the title programs and the special education, so that 57.5 million encroachment, what does that usually constitute? What does that mean, like encroachment, if you can share with us?
So encroachment means that of the funding that we receive to support our special education programs, the funding is insufficient to cover the actual cost of providing those services to our student population.
That are
So-
mandated.
Correct, that are mandated.
So
Correct.
I guess what I'm asking more so is why is that happening? Like where's the money going in terms of like,
Yeah, great question. So, and I hope I get where you're going, which is the funding that we receive from state and federal is below what it costs us to provide those services. So we have to, because we're providing those services in terms of programming staff at a certain level, we're funded at this level, we have to fill the gap.
A good example, Myra, would be, for instance, transportation.
Correct.
So if they give us a certain amount of money, but it doesn't pay the total cost for transportation that they mandate that we give, then we have to pay it ourselves.
no, and I get that part. I guess I'm not phrasing my question correctly. What I'm trying to understand is, I think I heard Dr. Flores say that if that amount varied, right? Does that
Yeah.
amount vary from year to year?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So has it been consistently going up over the years?
Yes.
That encroachment?
Yes.
And so I guess that's the question that I'm asking. Why is that the case? And by how much has it been
Oh,
going
yeah.
up, right?
So, great question. So yes, it does go up. And historically, in every school district in California, I would venture to say nationwide, special education contributions go up every year. The 1 year that it didn't was last year. And why that was, because we were in full closure. We were doing distance learning only. And so some of the services and supports, transportation, you weren't providing those. So your obligations, financial obligations weren't as great. And so you didn't have to contribute as much to that. So I would say, and Janet can correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 1.5 to 2 million every year that it increases. More. Yeah. Yeah, and to go back to your question about why, well, just like every other portion of our general fund, when we have step and column for our staff where they move on the salary schedule, those are additional costs. When we have pension cost increase that are passed on to us by STRS and PERS, that additional contribution we pay for special education like we do for all of our other staff. And so those are just natural increases. But also, too, you can get increased costs related to high-cost placements of students. So there's a number of options or reasons why that increases, but the cost of providing services is a big one, but it is not the only reason.
And just to kind of finalize, so I'm hearing and I'm registering. I guess I would just like for in the future if we can maybe get like a breakdown into further detail in terms of that encroachment and what does that look like laid out.
And absolutely, and so I will verify, because I thought I saw it in here, when you receive the information for first interim, we provide the budget books. So there is a graphic in there that shows the historical and projected increases for our special education contribution. I think, yeah. I believe I saw it. So.
And really, if you wanted to, they could give you a detailed spreadsheet
Yeah.
of how they built this number.
Yeah.
So you can see exactly what they're spending the money on, whether it's transportation, whether it's extra employees, whether it's outside services. You'll see what that actual cost is, the money is spent on.
Okay. Mr. Salas Medina?
No, and I just wanted to add to, with the reasons why we're not receiving the money, it goes back to legislators. There has been a complaint since I even started, even before then, of making sure that we have enough money. And I think what happens is that districts who feel that we need to do more for our special education students, then we know that we have to add more funding from, and pull away funding from the base money. Back then it was, the different funding models, but it is something that's very important on how we're looking at it, and talking to not just State Senator Connie Leyva, but as well as Assembly members, and there's other senators that's in our region, as well as the congressional offices. That way we're building those relationships. I do want to add with what Mr. Tillman mentioned, because I mean, that's something that we should have automatically, and that's a suggestion with the property taxes. Because I was writing down what you mentioned, the numbers and percentages, because I think it's important for us to look at both federally, state, and looking at all the other monies as well. Because I know that you mentioned lottery is also an example, since we're putting it there. That's not necessarily part of the LCFF, but it gives us more of a breakdown. At least for me, it does help.
Sure.
So I would suggest that we do that.
We can absolutely do that. Show the breakout of what our state or our LCFF is, and what are the components that make that up. Absolutely.
Okay. I don't see any other questions.
Okay. So we're going to move into our budget and multi-year projection. So I wanted to talk about where we started in terms of the 21-22 adopted budget. So just a few salient points. At that time, we recognized, again, a $40 million structural deficit that was projected to increase over the next several years. To stabilize the budget, we utilized the $68.9 million in one-time funding, our ESSER funding, to help scaffold the budget over the next 3 years so that we could have a balanced budget and get that approved through the county. Also, there was a projection to recapture half of the enrollment that was lost last school year. So that was roughly about 1,041 students. And we realized that that did not occur. As we move into our first interim and as we go through the next slide, we'll see that did not occur. We also included in the budget adoption the additional $12.2 million in new concentration grant funding. As we move into the first interim, we will be adding the additional portion of that funding. And then also we had, and this was shared with the board previously, we had that $19.5 million in our LCAP plan that was designated for direct services to students. And that's going to be important as we move through the slides. I'll point that out, why that is out. So here are our projections at the first interim. This is the information that we know. While we know the legislative analyst is forecasting, the budget surplus, as we prepare our budget, we we follow the county guidelines through the common message to make sure that we're utilizing the assumptions that are recommended through that common message. Over the years, we project that this budget year we have the 5.07% COLA. In the next 2 years, we'll have 2.48 and 3.11% COLA respectively. We know through the conversation earlier that that is going to change once we get the governor's budget proposal, and that change will occur for 2022, 23, and 2023, 24, not the current budget year. As we project our declining enrollment in ADA, we are recognizing that those enrollment-based funding positions will decline through attrition as a result to align with those reductions in enrollment. We also recognize increasing costs, and we talk about this, and this was mentioned in the special education conversation, increasing costs for pension, increasing costs related to step and column, increasing costs related to our special education contribution. Those all have impact. So overall, based on our enrollment projections and our ADA projections, we're projecting next year to have a decline in revenue of $14.9 million. And that is that cliff effect that has been talked about, where the hold harmless is taken away, and we are left to deal with the loss of enrollment and subsequent ADA next year. This is related to loss of enrollment, that revenue. So why that's important is when we talk about the legislative advocacy for that soft landing, this is really critical because $14.9 million is a significant amount to be reduced out of our budget on an ongoing basis. We also saw a slight decrease in our unduplicated pupil percentage, going from 90.43% to 90.2%. And while that is moderate, we know that we're serving those student populations, and so we should receive the funding in order to support the needs of those students. And then also in our first interim projections, we are projecting the shift of our class size reduction, that we maintain our 24:1 class sizes. We incur additional expense beyond the class size augmentation that the state provides us. We incur an additional cost to enable our TK through our K through 3 programs to maintain 24:1. So with the new funding available, we're able to move those costs out of the base into this available new funding, and that reduces the pressure on the base, and that helps offset that additional decline in revenue that was, that additional decline in enrollment and subsequently the revenue where those 1,000 students didn't come back. So that is helping us keep pace so that as we move forward to our 3-year projections, we will be able to certify positively. And then, as mentioned on the previous slide, this is just a breakdown by year of the one-time ESSER funds that we are contributing to stabilize our budget. So this is a graph trend of our enrollment in ADA. The blue bar is our enrollment, the green bar is our ADA, and we can see when we get to 2019-20 to 2020-21, you can see with the blue bar, which is our enrollment, you can see a steep decline. That represents the 2,000 students that we lost last year. That is that. So while we saw that steep decrease, we see that the green bar, which represents our ADA, remains relatively flat. That's a result of the hold harmless. So we've maintained that hold harmless. But where we are challenged, and it relates back to the current year, is because we are still in the midst of a pandemic. We are dealing with quarantines, students not coming to school, and so our ADA is taking a hit. And you can see that when you move from 2020-21 to 2021-22, that green bar drops significantly. And that's a result of our downward projection that our ADA, which normally is about 94.09%, goes down to 91%. So when we think about that soft landing, this is an example of why it is so vitally necessary for us. So when we project that and we move into next budget year, even though we had that steep decline, we are projecting that our ADA rates will recover next year. And so next year, we will actually be funded on the greater of the current or prior year. Next year will be the greater of the current year. So next year's funding or ADA will be the basis for our funding, not this year's. So that helps us, but we still take a small hit because we go from year to year and incur additional decline in enrollment.
All right, Mr. Tillman?
So let me start there. Why do you think our ADA is going to go up next year?
Well, I think it's going to restore. I think this is artificial where we are right now. We're at 91%, which is not historically where we are. Now, as we move forward and we see that we're still in the grips of the pandemic,
But you're at 91% of what?
91% of our enrollment. We are typically
So-
94%. ADA. ADA.
But you're at 91% of expected enrollment, right?
Correct. 91.
You're
No.
91% of, well, let's use a different word, of projected enrollment.
No,
No,
this is
that's
for this
actual.
year. 91% of this year's enrollment.
Right.
I guess right. So, but you said that next year you expect to get a bump up.
Well, no. Next year, we expect that this year is an anomaly because we reopened schools and the pandemic has not gone away. So we've had to deal with the consequences with quarantines, parents keeping students. So we anticipate next year that where we are normally at
Right.
94% ADA as a percent of enrollment, we will return to that.
Well, I want to say I'm not part of the we,
Okay.
because I don't think you're going to, there's no way of, statewide, ADA has declined. And the things I've heard are that is just the population. So even, I know the pandemic probably made it worse, but there's nothing to suggest that you're going to have a big increase next year. And not only that, we don't know where this COVID thing is going to lead us into next year. So I wouldn't put a lot of credence in saying that we think we're going to be back at 94%. I just hope we're cautious on that.
Sure.
And then I had a question on page 12. It says, "Does shift of cost to reduce class size to 24-1 has been included." So there's some new thing where we're going to reduce class size?
So this was we've already reduced class sizes. So we incur those expenses to maintain the 24-1 class sizes. As presented in prior board meetings, I showed a multi-year projection where we shifted expenditures from the base into the new concentration grant dollars to relieve the cost pressure and so we're leveraging those resources to take credit for something that we've been doing, and it relieves that pressure on the base.
And then I know these numbers that you're talking about now are for 21, 22, right? And we're not taking into account any of the good news we got recently, right?
No,
And
nor could we.
And that's the question I want to ask. So at what point are you able to factor in what the new projections are? And I'll give you a big example. You use a whole lot of extra money to balance the budget for ongoing years. Now, it's obvious that money's not going to be needed to do the same thing that we thought it was for those outgoing years, because we see with confidence that new money is coming. But I do realize you have to report to the county based on the numbers that we have right now.
Correct.
At what point does it have to wait until the budget is passed?
No.
When are we able to use
So-
those new monies?
In part, some of it will have to wait till the May revise in the budget. But generally, when we get to the second interim, there are certain things like COLA that we will be able to include in there.
Because they've told us already we're going to have it.
So, so there are some things that are more certain and some that are less certain. So the things that are less certain in the proposal, we would not include. Those things that are more
When
certain.
is second interim?
Second interim, we report that, it starts January 31st, but the board, we report in March, the beginning of March.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Forrest?
So staying on page 12, on slight decrease in unduplicated pupil percentages from 90.43% to 90.2%, 20%.
Yeah.
This is based on the current, right, the current enrollment and so
Current.
forth.
Current, yes.
So, given that we're gonna increase TK offerings, it may go up.
Correct, correct.
Right, so
yeah.
that's what that's
Correct.
what we're anticipating, correct?
Hopefully, yes.
Okay, good,
Absolutely.
okay, that's all. I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify
And
that
part-
doesn't include our enrollment and TK. Yeah,
Correct.
Okay,
And I would also go to just remind the board that even though it decreased by just under 1/4%, we will not feel that effect immediately because there's a 3-year average. So, to your point, Dr. Flores, if our unduplicated pupil percentage goes up next year, that will change the 3-year average and,
Right,
put us in a
exactly.
better situation.
okay, thank you.
Ms. Ceballos?
Just very quickly going back to page 13 to just make sure I understand correctly. Enrollment is what we currently have in the district for 21-22, that blue line, right? So ADA is attendance, right?
Correct.
So the reason why that green bar has taken such a big dip, you're saying it's because of potentially quarantining
Correct.
students and so forth. So I guess my question is, are we getting like any kind of like break from like the state when it comes to like
So,
having to miss class for students due to having to quarantine?
so there are, the state did not make it easy for us. The state wanted accountability. So they didn't want to just give us funding for ADA if kids didn't show up because of quarantine. So what they did was they tied it to independent study. You know, so if you can get a student on independent study during the period of quarantine, then you can count ADA. But there's a lot of elements at play that have to happen, you know, in terms of making that happen. And that can be very difficult because if parents don't agree to it, we can't, they're not on independent study and we don't get to claim any ADA for it. So that's also part of the challenge is the state really created this cumbersome process that really didn't take into account the realities of what we're dealing with in terms of being still in the middle of a pandemic.
So I guess my concern is because that is a big, deep,
Correct.
decline there on that green bar. So I guess if you could help me better understand, once a student was quarantined, right, they would usually go out, anywhere from like 10 to 14 days, something
Correct.
like that, right?
Correct.
Depending on their vaccination status, depending on whether or not they're showing symptoms and all these other things.
Correct.
So if they were to be out for that minimum 10 to 14 days, they would still remain at their school of enrollment,
Correct.
right? They wouldn't need to go to virtual or anything like that.
No.
If they were going to be out for longer, then that would have been an option that would have been provided, correct? Okay.
Correct.
So my question is, during those 14 days that the students still consider to be part of the school, are we able to collect ADA?
We are not.
Oh,
We are not.
okay.
Can't hear you. A little bit more. Right there.
So students are offered the short-term independent study once they go out on a quarantine. Now, if students' parents refuse to sign the master agreement, we don't get any credit on that. If we provide the work for the students and the students have not turned in any work, we can't get credit for that either. So that's kind of the issue. Now, not only do you have the issue with the quarantine that could last up to 14 days, et cetera, you also have the daily attendance where parents will call and say, my student's not feeling well, I'm going to keep him home. So it's a COVID-related concern, but it does not fall within the umbrella of any time of short-term independent study. So we have lots of different forces at play right now. It's not just the quarantine situation.
Okay, so then that makes sense going back to what Mr. Solons was saying, that he anticipated ADA to go back up next year. Not enrollment, that's a whole separate issue, but at least the ADA, because this is an anomaly year in terms of the absences and so forth, right?
Yeah, it is definitely possible, but again, we don't know how it's gonna play out later on. Because you'll have, the vaccination status. If they don't wanna come to school, then we have to put them in virtual. So there's lots of undetermined, unrealized uncertainty to know what it will actually look like. But preliminarily, we're looking at if COVID goes away or if we're able to find other mitigating factors, we should be able to increase it. But at this current state, with the pandemic and all of the issues that it has with COVID-related attendance, that's why we're down.
So then next year, that ADA that gets established, and by when will it be established for it to be what the state hold us to?
So the ADA gets established during our P reporting period. So we have 3 reporting periods. P1, which gives a projection of where our enrollment's trending. But P2 is the reporting period in which that is the basis for our funding, and that's at the end of March. So what ends up happening is we are funded in advance. So for example, because we move into this school year and we're not in March yet, we don't know what our enrollment eventually will be when we report. We can see where it's trending right now, but our final report, our P1 will be due in January, our P2 will be due in March, at the end of March. And so how do you project when the reporting period for the basis of this year's funding is in March? Well, what the state does is they take last year's and they basically advance you a portion of your revenues, and then when your reporting comes in, they true it up and say, we overpaid you, or we didn't pay you enough because your enrollment, what you reported was either higher or lower.
Got it. And is that an area that we can advocate more for at that end?
Oh yeah, and so this goes back to what we were talking about early on with that soft landing. This is not unique to San Bernardino City. This is happening statewide, and there's a lot of advocacy. As I mentioned, there was the Oversight Committee hearing on November 30th. So we feel very strongly that we're going to get traction, but for the purposes of budgets, we can't project or budget on hope that they're going to do the right thing. So we have to project with the information that we know now. So as Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, as we move closer and further into the school year, if we see that we're still in the grips of this pandemic, we may change our ADA projections to say, you know what, we don't think we're going to go back to where our normal are. But at this point in time, that's where we're projecting. But we will update our assumptions as we move through the year and we get additional information.
And Mr. Sellens, I don't see any other questions. Just real quick, I want to ask you a question. On our, back to our structural deficit. So I'm on page, I think that's 11, yeah, page 11. What, if you can tell me, what services or what are some of the services that we either stopped or are doing less of to create this offset that we have now to add to our structural deficit? Looking at that one-time fund that we have, or what was that funding even for?
I'm going to ask you if you could repeat the question.
So,
I guess I wasn't.
so we utilized our one-time funding that we
Correct.
received to stabilize our
Yep.
budget. What form or what particular services did we cut back or didn't do in order to begin to stabilize our deficit? That funding that we used, what did we not move forward doing?
That's, yeah.
But we
Correct.
used the money. We used
Yeah,
the money. So what did we not
So
do?
that's a good question. So, well, we're going to talk about it in a few slides.
Okay.
The first step when I presented the budget stabilization, we always want to do things that are least impactful because we don't want to disrupt our programs, our staff, our students.
Right.
And so when we look at the phasing, the most significant thing we did was we took this new available dollars and we moved expenses because that
Okay.
doesn't impact anyone.
Okay.
It keeps our class sizes. It accomplishes a great thing in terms of relieving the pressure off the base, but it doesn't cut a program, a service to anyone.
Good.
And so that's the biggest step that we have.
Okay.
The other piece is Ms. King and Ms. Tagashi, they embarked on the budget subcommittee work. And so through that work, there were discussions with our stakeholder groups to talk about what are potential options. Now, as we move through a budget cycle and we get new information like what we're going to get in January, it's going to be positive. So through that work, they've identified potential reductions, limitations on spending, ways to increase revenue, things like that. And so those are a list of options that we have and we have stakeholder input on that we can bring forward as we identify the need to cut further. As we look forward now, and you'll see this in the subsequent slides, just that shift has been very helpful. And when we look forward to January, we know we're going to get good news, and that is going to put our budget in a very good place and limit the amount of reductions that we would need to take place.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. All right, we're moving forward.
Okay. Okay, so
14?
Yeah, so changes since budget adoption. So this is just an overview. When we adopt a budget, there is still a lot of missing information when we adopt a budget. We don't, we basically build a budget off of the May revise. And we know from May revise to when the enacted state budget, there's a lot of negotiation that happens between the governor and the legislature. So there's changes that occur after we adopt our budget that we need to represent. So on the revenue side, the most significant piece is we added back that additional supplement or concentration grant funding from that new funding source, that new concentration grant increase. We budgeted 12.2, but we were going to projected to receive 21.8. So that additional 9.6 brings us up to that 21.8. And those are the dollars that we leverage to do the shift of expenses. The other piece is generally we have to shift expenditures through a to our charter schools because of the way we are funded and the way charter schools are funded. We're funded on the greater of the current or prior year ADA. For us, because we're declining enrollment, it is the prior year. Charter schools are funded on the current year. So as we lose students to charter schools, the state doesn't want to pay twice because they pay them in the current year and they pay us for the prior year. So we have to move out that shift of students, and so we lose revenue. Because of where we are in the hold harmless, we did not have to make that shift, so that returns $2.6 million to our budget this year. However, next year, we are going to have to return to that shift. And so if we're losing students to charter schools, we will have to shift those funds about commensurate with the students we lost. And then on the expenditure side, as we go through, the best laid plans, we prepare budgets and we have ideas on how we're going to spend. So some of those expenditures don't come to fruition. So we can see we had salary and benefits savings. We also had additional indirect cost, which is a reduction of our expenses. We received money from our categorical and restricted programs to pay the general fund for services that we provide, such as fiscal work, HR work. So that is a payment back to the general fund from these restricted that is allowable. And so since we had a lot of one-time dollars coming in, that increased the offset of our expenses that we received to the general fund from those restricted programs. We also, when we closed the books, if you recall during the unaudited actuals, we increased our, I'm sorry, this is carryover. When we close our books, we have carryover that we move in. So that's additional carryover. We have the unspent balances for our LCAP. So when I talk about that new concentration grant dollars, as well as that 19.5 that was included in the LCAP for direct services to students, we have not taken or expended any of those dollars or very little of those dollars for any of those purposes. So as a result, those dollars fall to the ending fund balance because they were unspent. We're going to talk about those because there are requirements for those unspent LCAP dollars. And then you can see that overall, our projected excess or increase to our fund balance is $24.9 million on our unrestricted general fund. So, next, we wanted to talk a little bit about our one-time resources, our ESSER and our AB 86 resources. We have gladly moved ESSER 1 off of the list because we are projected to fully expend this year. And so that is not included. We had very little carryover of ESSER 1 dollars. On ESSER 2 and 3, we can see what our total award was and what we have either actually spent or encumbered to expend as of November 30th. So we are making traction on that, as well as with our state AB 86 funds for 86 funds for our expanded learning programs and opportunities for students. So this is just an update to the board of where we're trending. To Mr. Tillman's comment earlier, we are in full agreement. Cabinet is actually working on exit strategies for this funding, similar to what the state did for districts, which is they set a deadline. If you did not spend dollars by X if you had unspent dollars by this time, then those dollars were taken and they were utilized for other purposes. That way we build in to the schedule enough time to make sure we're fully expending those dollars.
Correct. Appreciate that. Okay.
Okay, and
So-
Okay, so let,
Madam
go ahead.
President,
Yes.
okay, yeah,
can I go?
go ahead.
Mr. Sullivan, so in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and in AB 86, these are the encumbered amounts. So we still have the remaining in each category to spend.
Correct.
So do we have a projection of how we're going to spend those monies so that we meet the deadlines for 9/30/23, 9/30/24?
We do. We have expenditure
You do?
for every single program,
Okay.
ESSER 2, ESSER 3, AB 86, and we also have a waiting list. So when I talked about those unspent dollars, if we're not able to spend certain dollars by, we have a list of other things that we can spend those
Okay.
dollars on. So
Okay, great. And then going to slide 14, I mean, we got a lot of money, one-time money. So I don't understand how we can have a deficit of 3.2 million on number 4.
sorry, I'm going back.
On slide, on
Oh, I'm
page
sorry.
14.
That negative number. So it's sorry.
Why is that a negative?
So that's a negative because those are offsets of expenditures that restricted programs paid to the general fund. Because we provide services to restricted programs, Title I, for hiring people, for the fiscal activities. So those are called indirect costs that we provide to those programs. So there is a allowment in those programs to take a portion of those dollars, and they're preset percentage rates at which we can charge indirects, and those indirects are brought back into the unrestricted general fund as an offset or a reduction of expenditures on our expenditure side.
So we had to make up this 3.2.
So we reduced our expenditures by 3.2.
Okay.
Or we had we had an additional 3.2 million on top of what we already had.
And what we
Yeah,
allocated.
correct.
And then I just wondered, is it even possible to know or keep track of how many students we've lost to charter schools?
Yep.
It is?
We can give you that.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many have gone to charter schools
You mean during the pandemic?
during the pandemic.
Yeah, we can give you.
The last 18.
We can give you that information in a Friday update. We have that information.
Okay, great. Okay,
We'll do it to date.
okay. Thank you.
Mr. Tillman?
So, Mr. Sullins, the dialogue and the direction prior to 2 weeks ago was a lot of this money is going to be used to help balance the budget in out years.
Correct.
So have you had a meeting since we got the good news about how the money's going to be spent?
Not yet. So,
Because that's a big deal now.
no, I
Because
agree.
Because now you have all these millions of dollars that you thought were going to be needed to balance the budget, and now you realize these out years
Yeah.
is not going to be needed, but therefore we still want to spend the money.
Correct.
So now how do we spend all this one-time money?
Correct, in full agreement, and again, we as a cabinet have already talked about the sort of ripcord to pull, so that we can make sure that we're fully spending. And as I mentioned, as we are getting additional asks for things, we are creating a waiting list so that when we look at the need to move some of those that were previously gonna support our budget out, then we have some. Mr. Precy in the back is chomping at the bit because they have a lot of facility projects that you can use ESSER dollars for.
So let me ask you guys a question. I read a story on the internet about, because these are federal money, right?
Correct.
And the question was, could the money be used to fund, in this case, it was a district that had problems with transportation. And they said the money could be used to pay for transportation, including bus drivers and incentive for bus drivers to keep them because they were losing them to other competing industries. So does that mean that it's the same for all employees, or is there something unique about bus drivers and transportation?
Well, great question. So the answer is it depends because we have to be able to tie it to the condition of COVID. So in the example that you provided, the staffing shortage is a good example that this is sort of a consequence of where we are in the COVID pandemic. So if we can sort of make that nexus, then we could.
And I say that one area that I do have a concern with, just from talking to people from a practical perspective, for instance, substitute teachers. And I try to recruit people to come and sub to our district, and they can tell me the pay that all the districts are getting, and a lot of them are in excess of what we're paying. So I just want to make sure we're out there competing with
higher.
the surrounding districts to ensure that we're recruiting the teachers and substitute teachers so that we can ensure that we're able to conduct business and have these classes because the pool of employees out there has been reduced.
Correct. And to your point, Mr. Tillman, we actually did increase our sub rate to
Yeah.
$230. So we are competitive, but we did it utilizing ESSER dollars.
Just
So
recently, yeah.
as well as some of the other needs to support our virtual academy, we're leveraging some of those dollars to support that. So I completely agree.
Thank you.
Ms. Ceballos?
Yeah, so I was going to ask that actually because I remember hearing that we had increased. I think the only one that we weren't higher than was somewhere up the mountain, right? But the other ones we were. So I'm glad to hear that.
Pomona has his beat now.
That that's the case. I did want to ask, I guess, because of previous conversations that we have had on, previous board meetings, that I hear the concern being that we make sure that we do spend the money in the time allocated because we don't want to return the money, correct? So it sounds like you do have a plan to spend the money, and then you have a plan on top of the plan in case that plan
Yeah.
doesn't, for
Well,
whatever reason.
and-
You
and
have waiting
We
lists for.
we have waiting list items, but I think to Mr. Tillman's point, as the budget improves with the additional state dollars, the need for some of those ESSER dollars to scaffold our budget become less. And so what's the plan with those? So that is, again, part of it is going to be utilized by the waiting list items because we do have some larger items that are on the waiting list. And so as we go through and we identify what's going to sort of fall away from those ESSER dollars, then we can move those expenditures in to make sure that we're fully expended.
And I guess based on that, my question is for whatever new dollars that we will be getting, we will most likely also have a spend date attached to those, correct? If they're one-time monies. Or, okay. And that is not going to be 9/30/2023, I assume.
No, and I would just say not necessarily. Some one-time dollars may not come with a deadline
Okay.
from the state. Some will, some may not.
And the ones that don't come with the deadline, does that mean that we are free to utilize them up until whenever we utilize them?
Correct.
But the ones that do come with the deadline,
Yeah.
it will most likely not be 9/30/2023, or, you know.
No,
So
it's
I,
the
gue-
state, so no promises.
I guess
Yeah,
what
no, I
I'm
know.
trying to ask, and
Yeah.
again, I hear
I know
you.
what you're saying.
You don't know. Whatever income we do get,
Yeah.
we will get an extended amount on top of this to spend it, correct? I mean,
Correct. Correct.
that's the assumption.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But can I say, normally in the money that he's talking about, we're talking about one-time money, there isn't a timetable on when it has to be spent.
well, this one is, and this is one-time money.
Well,
I'm talk-
some.
No, I'm talking about, I assume you were talking about the budget presentation where he talked about the additional one-time money being like $9 billion for the state. There's a part in the presentation where there's a nine.
So there's
a n-
10.2 in one
10.2.
time, in
And
one-time
so
dollar.
when he talks about that one-time money, there isn't going to be any type of deadline on those money.
There's not going to be what?
A deadline on when it has to be spent. But the caveat is you're only going to get it one time.
Right.
Right. But there's not going to be like a deadline. This thing with the ESSER money was unique, where you had to spend it by a certain
I'm
date.
not worried about it.
Normally, when you get one-time money, it doesn't have a deadline where you have to spend it by.
I hear what you're saying. Okay. I just want to make sure, though, that we do have a plan to spend the money, because I hear the concern.
Yeah.
And that we do have the plan, and then whatever backup
We do have a-
plans that we have, and then whatever additional income we are going to get, that's not going to affect us in the sense of we get stuck somewhere where we don't spend the money because
Yes,
we
correct.
didn't foresee the new money coming in.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
And our plan, and remember, Mr. Ceballos, our plan and focus is always going to be is how do we increase services to kids? That's going to be our focus. And so we do have a plan. There's an A, B, and C, but we are focusing on how do we overall improve student achievement and how do we and provide more direct services to students. So that is our major focus that I've tasked the team with. So that's going to be part of that.
And I, just to kind of emphasize on that, because the need is so great, right? We have a high needs district in terms of the population that we serve. And so I would expect that we as a board, do take that into consideration when deciding what these funds are going to be spent on, whether it's one time or not one time, that we make sure that the money is going to go back to students, support and achievement.
Well, we'll present that plan and that overview, especially as we finish up our goals. We're going to present that, but I'll be honest with you. Yes, we will be focusing on direct services and how do we support students in the classroom. And that'll be. I don't think that's a shift from what the district has already been doing. They've always been focusing on how to improve student achievement, but definitely that's the goal. That's the plan. And I agree with you. I hope the board supports that plan because, again, it has to be direct services to kids, especially on the other side of this pandemic. But that's the direction that we're going as of right now.
All right, Ms. Rosales Medina?
Yes, and I just wanted to just clarify because I think we're looking at ESSER 3 and the fact that we have a little bit over 200,000 that has not been spent. Million, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't see the extras. So $200 million that has not been spent. So far it's been 25 million. And, and I guess I just wanted to mention, the extra money that we're going to be receiving is on top of this. So
Right.
whatever we get funding for can maybe pulled away from the area that you may have already allocated for what we're planning to spend in this area. I just want to make sure people understand there's a lot of money that can be shifted and switched over so that we can utilize this funding. Because this is a lot of money that has not been spent so far.
Right.
It's a lot
Yeah.
of money.
And I would just add, especially with the ESSER 3, and I think Mr. Tillman said that at a previous board meeting, and well said. The state and the federal government, they put us in very difficult positions. They give us money, and then they don't, and then they say there's a plan that you have to prepare, and the board has to adopt, but we're not going to give you that for 4 months, and then you have to rush to get that plan approved, by the board. And so when we think about the ESSER 3, if you recall, that was due in October, the end of October, and so we brought that to the board. So at that point, we had not spent any dollars because we did not have a board-approved plan. So ESSER 3 is behind or a little bit less spent than some of the other fundings because we haven't had access to spend it as early as some of the other ones because of that board approval process. And again, it's usually not a doing of the district. It's usually the accountability requirements that are required about us. We don't get that information until much later, and then they give us a very short deadline to get it all accomplished. For ESSER, yes. Yeah, so ESSER monies are coming in, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So as we've gone through, and this will be the first interim multi-projections that will be presented to the board next week. We can see that on the revenue side with the changes that were referenced earlier, that we plan to have an increase in our fund balance of 48.8 million for this year, bringing it up to 185.6. And what I wanted, well, actually, this is not the slide. So what I wanted to show you is as we go through and we look at our reserve for deficit spending and our reserve for economic uncertainties, we are able over the next three to not only meet our reserve for economic uncertainties, which is going to be the basis for whether we can submit or whether we can certify a positive certification with the county. We also will end that third year with an additional 15.1 million for deficits or to reduce deficit spending. So while we're spending those dollars down, because of the shift of expenses, we were able to put the budget in a better place. Had we not done that shift and we would have had to recognize that loss in ADA, we would have not projected a positive budget certification, and we would have likely had to implement some of the strategies that the budget subcommittee had entailed, relied on the governor's budget proposal to provide help, or utilize additional one-time dollars to scaffold our budget. Yes.
Dr. Flores?
So these projections are based on the increases we're getting or just the status quo that we were in?
So great question. So this is just where we are now.
Without
the increases
anything
on
else?
Yeah, the increases in January,
Oh, that's good.
we're not able to
Okay.
project. Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and as you go through the other slides, you'll see.
So and this is what I referenced earlier. So this is the general fund ending fund balance, including reserves. So as we go through, we look at the large bar here. Sorry, it's not working. Okay, it's not working. So the large bar that you see for 21-22, you see a large increase in our red, which is our restricted funding, and that is largely due to the restricted programs that we've added to our budget that have come after the as a result of the enacted state budget. So after we adopted our budget, we received additional restricted resources for our Expanded Learning Opportunities Program grant, which is $27 million. Our Educator Effectiveness Grant, which is $12.3 million. So again, we built our budget, but we received a lot of these funds after the fact. So now as we move to first interim, we have to reflect those additional funds that we received because that was a change from adopted budget. So that's why you see a large increase there. In the middle, you see the green spaces, and you see the notation that those are unspent supplemental and concentration grant dollars. So as I referenced earlier, we had the additional new concentration grant as well as that unspent, those unspent LCAP priority dollars of 18.1 million total. So that's represented in there because that's reserved. Because of the change in the law that came with the enacted state budget, we can no longer sweep supplemental concentration grant dollars into our general fund to help, balance. We have to designate them and repurpose them and redistribute them for services and actions that support those student populations. So that's why that's reserved. So next year, we don't have a reserve because we're projecting to reinvest those supplemental concentration grant dollars.
Madam President, so just to clarify, we roll over that money
Correct.
for targeted for services to our unduplicated pupils.
Correct. So we've talked a lot and covered a lot of information, but we still have ongoing budget challenges. And while the governor's January proposal is boding well in terms of what resources it will bring to the district, we still have some challenges. We are in, and I think Mr. Tillman alluded to this, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So while we are projecting for next year that we may return to normal, as we continue to move along and are continue to be in the pandemic, that may not be the case, and we can continue to see negative impacts to our enrollment and ADA potentially. So that's something that we have to be cautious of. We also are continuing to experiencing escalating pension contributions. We discussed our local contribution to support our special education program staffing, and that again will continue and has continued over the last several years, and those are needed services. Our kiddos need it, and so I'm very proud that this board and this district has really stepped up to make those investments. The one thing that I would like to point out, this is a new one, is that we have a staffing paradox. And that staffing paradox is, on the one hand, we have a declining enrollment, and we have positions that are staffed and in terms of enrollment-based staffing. And so as our enrollment declines, there is a need to right-size our staffing to adjust to that enrollment. Because the further we delay it, the greater the impact becomes. So while we have the additional dollars and we've been able to keep some positions going, that may not always be the case. So we always like to share that information. Yes.
I don't know if you can answer, Madam President. I don't know if Mr. Solons can answer, or if Dr. Funches, sorry, Dr. Funches can answer it. So are you projecting retirement and in terms of the staffing decline? I mean, in terms of enrollment, are you doing that research and analysis?
Yeah, so Dr. Flores, great question. Right now, we are evaluating our resignations and retirements, and we are keeping an eye on what that might look like. We don't have that exact number at this time, but we are making sure that we're keeping that in front of us, because that'll inform how we staff our schools and departments.
Keeping on top of it in terms of, ongoing analysis.
Correct.
And that way, well, I mean, it's a big, a big lift to
Understood.
do all of that. I mean, it really, really is.
No.
And we're talking about our teachers, our professionals, and I mean, I would like to mitigate any kind of layoffs if at all possible. And I don't even like to say the word, but if we can do that by, what do you call it when people retire?
Attrition.
Yes, attrition, from our attrition numbers, yeah.
That's our intent.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Along those lines, for me, the big picture is, 3 weeks ago, I felt like we were in dire straits and didn't know how we were going to get a balanced budget once the ESSER money went away. And never dreamed that I would go to CSBA last weekend and hear we're going to get all this new money. It's just, unheard of. It's just unbelievable to me. But that's the reality that we're faced with. But I think then our goal should be to make sure, more than anything, that we create a balanced budget. And so through attrition and then looking at our actual numbers, make sure that we get our expenditures in line with our revenues, because this is the opportunity where we can do it. Even, I get a good example. I don't know when the whole extra grade level is going to come in. What is it? Is it 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds?
No, it's 4 years old.
So when is that supposed to take place?
It's phased in, so it starts as soon as next year.
So my point being, if we have teachers leaving and then we notice that we have too many teachers and other staff, then a lot of that should be shifted to fill those positions at
Yeah,
that new grade
correct.
level.
Agreed.
But what you don't want to do is maintain the same level that you have now in the areas where you have too much staff, and at the same time hire new people for those new grades, because then you're going to compound the problem.
That makes sense.
But that has to be the discussion that you all are having, and it gets back to this same big concern that I have, and that is that extra money. You can't have people using that money to hire people that are outside of the other new money that we're going to get, because then that would put us in a disastrous place, and that's a whole lot of money, and that's where my biggest fear is. And I think that at some point, when we discuss the new funding and even the extra money, because what hasn't happened is, and Mr. Sullivan said it, they haven't adjusted for this new money that's been announced. So when we back out that extra money that was going to relieve the problems for the budget out years and say, what do we spend it on? I really think that we should have all stakeholders around the table and get input from everyone and then move forward. That will include some of the new things that the superintendent wants to do. But I think the worst mistake for us to make in a time where we have an opportunity to have a lot of new money is not to listen to everybody. And that's parents, teacher, classified employees, students, parent groups, the community, to make sure we're spending this money and structuring our new budget in a way that is going to solve the problems that we all agree exist. But I think we have to hear from everyone. I don't think we should sit back and say, we know how to fix it, we don't need to talk to anybody, and we're going to spend this money and you're going to be happy. I think that'd be the biggest mistake in the world, and it's not something that has to happen. There's enough right now to take care of issues and problems that a lot of people have identified. So I just hope that Mr. Irvin takes the lead and make sure we get input from all our stakeholders and make sure we're all moving along at in the same direction, and everyone benefits from this increased revenues. But the key being, make sure that above everything else, that we have a balanced budget in the next 2 or 3 years because of this additional funding.
And I just want to respond to Mr. Tillman. So, Mr. Tillman, of course, we obviously, Mr. Sullins and the team, we've been having a lot of conversations about how to balance the budget, and that's what we've been working on. As you can see, as we finish up the presentation today, we're going to have a balanced budget. So we were always planning on that. Secondly, at the same time, we agree with you, but we got to make sure that we still got to move forward with providing services to kids, and we have to find a way to make sure our students are at grade level across the board. So there's a delicate balance there. But also keep in mind that as we get this new money, even when we think about the additional dollars that we got previously, the district has always gotten great input from all their stakeholders. Now, as we go forward, as we begin our strategic planning process, as we lay out those 5 our overarching goals, we start thinking about our priorities. One of the things that happened during the 6 months of this listening and learning tour is getting input from everyone. That input was very clear on what we need to do in order to increase student achievement. The ultimate goal is we have to improve the quality of instruction. We have to increase student achievement. So that's already been taken into consideration as we begin the strategic planning process. So as we come forward with the current plan that we have, which is the strategic planning process, we put that's going to be put in place. There will be an opportunity for us to get feedback from all of those stakeholders. And then secondly, as we get these new dollars, we'll sit down and make sure as we do the strategic planning process, if anything comes up during that conversation with our educational partners, and all of our stakeholders, then we'll make those adjustments. For example, we know already, there's been conversation about wellness centers. Well, we're already ahead of that, but we also know within our classroom, when we look at our overall data, we still have to find a way on the other side of this pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, to increase student achievement. And so that's our number one priority. But again, I just want to make sure I agree with you, but we will continue to get input. We've always gotten a lot of input. But I do think we're at a good place because as we start the strategic planning process, all the information we've gotten over the last 6 months and prior to that, the work that Ann and her team did with the LCAP, we've gotten a lot of input over the last year. So we really got an idea of what direction we need to go. But if there's other things out there that we're missing, and like Mr. Sullivan said, if there's anything out there creative, things that we really need to do that's on that wish list, then we hope we can get to those things as well.
And we're not at the wrap up yet. You guys kind of went ahead of the stabilization strategy. So after Dr. Flores, if you can get
Yeah.
us to where your
I
thoughts
know we
were.
got to finish.
Yeah.
But Mr. Tillman, I agree with you. I think we need to have a forum. Mr. Irvin, we're a very collaborative culture, a very collaborative community. And even though you've gotten input from everybody, this is new money. And our community partners, our parents, our unions, you know, we just need to have forums where they're able to speak, you know, and share with us, and maybe even reiterate the things that you're saying, but then we're including them, and we've included them in a forum so that, you know, we can get the green light to go. I mean, I'm sure they'll say some of the things that you're saying, but it's just about providing them a forum. I would like it to be like when we first used to do, you know, a public forum in our community room, and you know, having, you know, people have 3 minutes, not 5, but 3 to speak or whatever, to come up, and that way, you know, everybody hears what everybody's saying instead of this group by themselves, this group by themselves, that group by themselves. So,
Dr. Flores, I want to
I would, you know, implore my board members to think about it and see if we can decide to do that.
I just want to get clarity, though. So based on what we already have going forward, I'm just trying to get clarity from those comments. Are you saying that we should start a new process? Because
No.
Okay, I was gonna say,
oh,
because
no, I'm not saying a new process.
you're saying
Just-
in terms of these
just
new
give 'em
dollars.
Just giving them a forum to provide their input.
So one of the things that we always have done as we look at these new dollars, as we go forward with the strategic planning process, we already have information that we have from the previous.
I understand that. I'm just saying we provide them a forum to share and reiterate some of their ideas. And it probably will be the same and some new ones too, but just giving them a forum to speak.
Are you
and
talking
share.
in regards to the new dollars? That's what I'm trying to get clarity
Yes,
on.
the new dollars.
Well,
yes.
yeah, as we get new monies, one of the things that we do is we start doing our strategic planning process.
No, I'm talking about having a budget forum.
No, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that as we go through the strategic planning process, one of the things that we'll be doing, though, as we get these new dollars, as we start prepping and planning for next year, part of that next phase of the listening and learning tour is going back and sharing where we are with the strategic planning process, but also having conversations at the same time that we have these additional new dollars and getting additional input on some of the other things that we will need. That's what I'm bringing clarity to. We still got to move forward with the strategic planning process. We still have to move forward with putting systems and structures in place for next year. However,
I'm not talking about that, Mr. Irvin. I'm talking about just providing, you know, our community a forum just to share with us what they think. That's all. I mean, we're going to keep going on with our strategic planning, all the other stuff that we do. But, you know, just hear what they have to say. That's it. That's all. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Ms. Ceballos?
Yeah, and so just to kind of like recap, because I'm like hearing a lot of different things, and again, I just want to make sure I have clarity as well into like the direction that we're going. I think that is a good idea, you know, to continue to hear from our stakeholders. I know that you've engaged in a very arduous process of listening and learning as you came in, and you have shared some of those findings with us. However, I think that, you know, because of the new money that's coming in, it's a good idea still to, you know, keep in touch with the community and stakeholders and so forth. However, I will caution that by saying it kind of feels like, to me, like there's been some delay in the process. And I think Mr. Harold said it best when he went over the ESSER 3 funding, that he said that we were a little bit behind schedule because it has to go through the board approval process, and that's where we haven't gotten to. So again, like I said, I'm hearing a lot of things, and I want to make sure that I'm listening and paying attention to some of the concerns even that my fellow board members have, like, Mr. Tillman, in regards to making sure that we do spend those monies in an adequate time. I do want to make sure that we're moving along in the process and really determining and establishing, I don't know, next board meeting or whenever to move into that direction without having to halt the process to, do more listening and more learning. Because you're right, we do need to put systems and structures in place now as we move forward, because, we've seen student achievement. It's no secret, right? We look at previous years, we look at it now even, and I know the pandemic has been, very, has been very hard on all students and teachers. But I think that in addition to looking at balancing the budget, which should be our priority, I think that our priority is also to provide those services to students and make sure that they are moving forward, both socially, emotionally, and academically. And that's going to come in my opinion, with putting those systems in place. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that and that we're able to move forward, so that we are able to spend those funds in that, time frame.
And we're planning on doing that. And I hear what Dr. Flores and Mr. Tillman is saying. So I just want to be clear. As we continue to move forward to prep and plan for next year, with these new additional dollars, one of the things we will do with the team is set aside some time to do some additional forms with our stakeholders to say, here's some additional dollars, here's our plan currently. However, we have additional dollars, and here's some ideas, but where else are you seeing? Like, for example, a parent recently said, hey, where are we at with the wellness centers? Well, if there's a way to do that, then let's start talking about that now. So there's going to be other things that we can do, but I agree that we need to have some additional forms, but I think that can be separate. We can't have a two-pronged approach, right? It could be simultaneously. Simultaneously, we can continue to move forward, putting systems and structure for next place, because we're already ready to roll with that. But at the same time, we can put some additional forms in place, town hall, to say, here's some additional dollars. Here's the things that we're currently looking for toward doing in the next 2 to 3 years. However, with these additional dollars, is there something else? I mean, it could be some school beautification, it could be wellness centers, it could be whatever it is. But we got to remember the one-time dollars versus ongoing dollars. We got to be careful, because ongoing, again, that's ongoing costs, and we have those one-time dollars. So we got to be careful on staffing as well, because so there's there's a two-pronged approach here, and I think that we hear you loud and clear, and I think that we're in agreement.
Just real quickly, I wanted to clarify, it wasn't the board or any of us that delayed the given, how'd you say,
The
for them to
ESSER?
give us the money? It was that the money was specified, but we only had so much time to do the plan, so it wasn't on our part at all. It was just the crunch of the deadlines, right?
That is correct.
Right, so we didn't lag in anything, it's just that the bureaucrats, the feds are like that, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that too, as well, because you mentioned it earlier too, when I mentioned, we had all this money, $200 million of money, and has not even been close to being spent, and then you kind of clarified that it was because of that process. But I do hear the frustration of not, having certain plans and not having those plans, receive funding for. And I think for me personally, when we had a shift of things going on within the district, with the new superintendent, is that you always want to go through the process first of listening and learning of what's going out there. And I think that's why you had paused on it. So that way afterwards, we can kind of move forward on what would be the next steps. It wasn't necessarily that, kind of prolonging it. It was just more of, with any new superintendent, there's a process with that. And that's where I feel like the reason why I kind of pushed to delay it a little bit, in the sense of we want to finish in listening and learning and have you really interact with those within the community and so forth. So that's how I feel it was. But I do hear your frustration of wanting to get things moving for our students.
Madam President.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President.
Wyatt.
Just, it's 8:10, and I recommend that we have Ms. Sohn finish up our presentation. We have 4 slides to go. It's been great information, great questions, great recommendations, and I just want to be respectful to our staff, ourselves, and our community and finish hopefully in a timely manner. So if we could get through the next 4 slides and then ask some questions after that, it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wyatt. Okay.
And then just on this slide, real briefly, you know, when I talk about the staffing paradox, we also are receiving this additional funding, and there are prescribed uses to provide direct services to students. So that's where that paradox comes. And then lastly, we talked about universal TK implementation, the impacts on facilities, staffing, and so on. So this slide was presented to the board previously. As we look at our budget stabilization strategy, we take a three-phase approach. Multiple phases can happen simultaneously. Obviously, phase 3 is the most restrictive when we have those harder conversations, and as Dr. Flores said, there are certain words we don't want to utter or ever get to. But this is the strategy and plan that we've been implementing. Obviously, we want to have the least impact to our programs and services, students and staff as possible. So as we looked, we talked a bit about the moving expenditures to maintain that class size reduction. As the governor's budget proposal comes forth, we're going to evaluate that proposal for the opportunities, again, to stabilize our budget and get that into a better place. Simultaneously, we also look at and evaluate our staffing to make sure that we are right-sizing our staffing, looking at our position control process, making sure that there is constant communication between fiscal and human resources to make sure that we have the most current information for the basis of preparing our budget. Obviously, exploring opportunities to increase ADA, intervention, outreach, ways to promote attendance culture within the district, evaluating contracts, as well as programs to identify efficiencies. And then lastly, and it doesn't seem the direction that we're moving at this point with the funding, but you know, implementing expenditure strategies where needed. So the board had, you know, previous conversations in the board meeting. There were conversations about proposed positions and funding changes, and the ask from the board was that this information be brought forward. And so on this table, we identify proposed positions for, you know, human resources, the STEAM director, which was formerly the director of continuous improvement, and the director of college and career readiness, which is was previously has been that position, but those two director positions had been vacated and not refilled. And so we broke it out by staffing to show, number one, what the additional cost would be for those positions, but again, what are the offsets that we've identified to help reduce the obligation to the district. So we see on the unrestricted side with our offsets and shifting expenditures, there is no increase to the unrestricted general fund. It is actually a reduction. On the restricted side, as we look at the STEAM director, we're looking to leverage the new expanded learning opportunity program grant to fund a portion of the STEAM director's work. So that removes half of that expense out of our LCAP and puts it in these new dollars because primarily that work is going to be surrounded by STEAM programs in our after-school programs. And then, you know, as we look at our custodial supervisors, we're looking to fund those positions on the restricted side of the budget. We are working with our maintenance and operations to identify contract offsets that will cover the expenditures for those additional positions. So here's just a breakout by funding. It's important to show it by funding because not all funding is unrestricted, and some of it is tied to restricted dollars and for restricted purposes. And so this is the positions that we are proposing or have been proposed, and these are the offsets as well as the additional costs. Flores?
Thank you, Madam President. So just to clarify, HR positions to be abolished, is that what you're proposing?
Correct.
Okay, so the HR director and secretary will be abolished?
No, so those would be established. There would be existing positions within HR that would be abolished. So essentially changing the position. So that's where the change in funding happens. You're establishing on one hand, and then you're abolishing for the offset. So,
so you're saying that you're asking the board to adopt and support HR director and HR secretary, 2 or 3. And so explain the red, the
So-
253,000.
So they all reminded me that I need to point out in this example, red is good. Red is good.
Red is good.
Red is good because that is, those are the identified cost reductions that will help to offset the expenditures. So when you look at the classified director and secretary, there are the additional cost of the 184 and 98, but there is position abolishments that will provide a savings.
Oh, so there's
Correct.
other HR abolishment.
Correct, correct,
Okay, that
correct,
will offset this.
correct.
Okay, okay. You didn't explain that well. Okay. Okay, I didn't quite get that. And then you're asking to rename the director of continuous improvement, which we have money for anyway.
Correct.
That has been vacant, to STEAM director.
And we're,
Okay,
and,
good.
and I would add that we're actually using some new dollars to fund half of that position, so it will
Okay.
actually provide some relief to our LCAP dollars.
And I know that our director of college and career readiness has been vacant, so that's already in the budget. Okay, and then explain what the impact to the general fund budget. Why do you have 163 there?
Well, because when you add
For that
when you add in the cost, less the reductions or the abolishments or the change in funding, so you're actually netting a savings to the unrestricted general fund of
For that one,
163.
okay.
Right.
So the additional 5 custodial supervisors, that's additional money
Correct.
that we
To
have
the
not.
restricted-
To
Yeah.
restricted.
routine restricted maintenance account. We,
Oh, to the restricted maintenance
correct.
account.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are,
And those are the ones that are going to supervise all
Sam, can you
the,
come
all
explain
the
to the board?
different,
Yes, that's going to be part of the service delivery model, but again, we're putting systems and structures in place now
so they will
for the future.
monitor, and problem solve and troubleshoot, like that.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Sam, you want to give the board a high-level overview, please?
Sure, that's correct. First talk about the funding. So we're looking at the $758,000 that's going to be coming out of the restricted routine maintenance account. So basically what we're looking at is a fairly high dollar HVAC contract that we have. So we're paying a substantial amount. So as we're looking at reducing our contract costs within our routine restricted maintenance account, we're going to be then using those funds to for these positions as well as some hourly HVAC technicians. As far as the systems and processes in place, it is exactly right. So we brought on about the 300 custodians into the maintenance and operations team. So to help alleviate and ensure that we have proper oversight and kind of realistic expectations of overseeing the additional staff members with evaluations, sick leave, industrial accidents, and other items like that. We also make sure we want to have the proper training and support, 5-star inspections. We're going to be benchmarking the performance criteria by school side, by shift, by individual supervisor, and then overall by the maintenance and operations team, looking and trending and tracking that year over year. So we have all those processes in place now. So these folks are going to be.
troubleshoot, like, when they call me or any of us about, not having, a custodian because they haven't cleaned their rooms, they haven't, they're the ones that are going to monitor that.
That's correct, yeah. And these folks are also tied with that transitional program that we put in place. This is also going to give the district flexibility in being able to move. This is all like tied into as a package, but this is going to give us the flexibility of being able to move custodians from one site to another to help alleviate that very issue.
I know that the high schools have a lot of them have complained because when one of them are sick or 2 of them get sick, then they're unable to clean everything. So are we going to have roving custodians to help?
Yes, we will. Yeah, we have
besides the on-site ones.
That's
Do
correct.
you know how many we have?
Yeah, right now we have 12 staff members.
12
That's on that.
additional that are rovers? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And that's part of the service delivery model. Again, we just want to make sure as we build the systems and structures out for the future, everything will be in clusters. And then that roving crews, those 12, will be able to move. Because one of the things we've heard from the board several occasions is the cleanliness of the campuses and the classrooms. And I will say, just to this point, visiting the schools on a regular basis, our campuses are starting to look clean in our classrooms,
Right.
but this will help with the
Right.
oversight.
Thank you. One last statement. Thank you, Mr. Irvin and Dr. Funches, for properly bringing these to us so that we can approve them. Yeah.
So I agree with the hiring these, but to me the difference is day and night because we know we have additional money now. So it changes everything. So it's easy to go along with the proposal. I think the transparency is the key, and this is the way that this board is accustomed to doing it. You show us what you want to do, and then we decide yes or no if we're going to approve it, but it has to happen that way. You mentioned something about cutting HVAC contracts. I would just, because we have the one-time funding and we have additional funding, I just be real cautious about making cuts because usually you need the most HVAC at the most critical time. It's 112 degrees. You thought you had some new staff. They didn't show up, but you got rid of your contract. That's not a good thing. I'm just saying.
We're going to clarify that, Sam. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're going to clarify that for a moment.
Yeah, so basically, the way the contracts work is there's a approved amount. Now, that doesn't mean we have to spend that full amount. We don't have to have 10 technicians or 6 technicians on staff. So that what we're not talking about is the PO amount. We're actually utilizing the spendable amount. So what we'll be utilizing is reducing those in addition to some of our ESSER projects because we're actually replacing some of our chiller maintenance to package units. That requires far less maintenance required as well as dollars spent and staffing hours.
Well, I hear you.
So there's a lot of stuff that's in
My
play
only
just
point
with.
is we're not in the same phase we were in 3 weeks ago.
I agree.
So I'm not really concerned about cutting corners, and I would hate to be in a predicament where I'm getting a call and that there's a school site and the HVAC is down because we made this cut. So I'm just saying, I'm not asking for cuts. I'm making sure that we have resources to sustain whatever the schools need. The other part, I'm all for going along with this thing for the superintendent's model with the additional 5 custodial supervisors. But we did hear in some of the meetings about the concerns for custodians saying we need actual more custodians because of the change. This is the part I'm talking about getting input. This might be a time when we can look at the budget and say, hey, because of the new funding, we may be able to hire some additional custodians to help do this work. Because the worst thing is to have folks supervising and saying, hey, you got to do better. And the folks doing the work saying we're doing our best and we don't have the resources and the people to do it. So that and even being able to bring in some private sector folks to get things up to speed and get them to the level you want and then have our own staff maintain it is an option now because we have that one-time money and some ongoing money. I just hope we consider that also.
And Mr. Tillman, we're looking at all options, and we will say that even in the service delivery model, even in this model, when Sam's talking about the 5 custodial supervisors, the oversight, again, they're going to be in clusters, so we got to make sure that our campuses are maintained, they're safe, and they're clean. However, at that same time, we are going to continue to find ways to hire additional custodians if it's possible. But again, I think there's some challenges with that because there is a bit of a shortage. So, but the supervisor's job is to make sure that when there are shortages at school sites, when they're not being cleaned, they'll be able to, within that cluster, use that roving crew to move them. Because if you don't have anyone overseeing it, then who's going to coordinate that? So you got to have individuals coordinating this structure.
And Mr. Urban, I think it's critical that because we have one-time money, that we look at contracting with private firms to come in and get us to the level that we want immediately and help expend some of that money.
Oh, no disagreement with that, but you know, though, Mr. Tillman, that would have to be something that's negotiated, I think.
I understand. Yeah,
With the unions, if we did that, they would have to agree to that. But no disagreement with you on
It'll benefit
that.
everybody to bring in outside folks. You told yourself, you said my alma mater didn't look good. You said that. Yeah, you did. You said it was all beige. And I said the B wing was always beige. But anyway, if we do want to add some color or whatever, then
know where you're going.
there's not a bad thing to say, hey, let's just get some estimates and bring some companies in, get them where we want, then let the existing staff maintain it. Thank you.
We agree with you on that one.
right.
I think we're already doing that on the beautification piece.
Okay.
Are we not,
And you'll
Sam?
be bringing us that. We'll
Yes,
have a
that is correct.
presentation on it. We'd love to see the plan so we can know the dollars. And we want to know the dollars that go along with it.
The RFP's going
Okay.
to purchasing very soon.
Okay, great.
And I do want to mention, I appreciate you bringing this forward to us, because this is how we're typically used to receiving positions and, explaining this is why it's important. So I do appreciate you doing that, because I think this is a kind of like, especially for Ms. Ceballos, with regards to what we have done before, and this is something similar to what we've done. With regards to the 5 custodial positions for the supervisors, it's about 150,000, was 150,000 with benefits for each person. And so I look at what the public comments that we did receive was the fact that, they need help and they need more support. So I guess one of the things would be if we're trying to have those supervisors come in, the custodial supervisors try to organize when we need to shift individuals, and if we're in a dire emergency, I would like to see that they also go into the school sites and be part of that. If there's an emergency, that they're also doing the work of custodial work, because, that was one of the issues. We weren't able to hire, and, looking at outside contracts in order to help support us. So I would like, if that's within the same position, for them to understand that within those emergency situations, they would be also going into school sites in supporting that.
Yeah, we agree with that, 100%.
And I also want to reiterate, but like Mr. Tillman said and Ms. Medina said, we do need additional custodians that this board, authorizes and directs superintendent to go ahead and hire them. And so I think that, it's becoming, it's based on us. It's our responsibility to support that and the cleanliness, of our schools. And, and I know you're military. I was raised from a military, your father. Cleanliness, was it. And it's really important and especially during COVID, right? And so we need to, listen to our CSEA, and make sure that we not just listen but act. And then I just want to ask, Madam President, are you putting these positions on our board meeting to take action?
I don't know if they have them ready yet. We don't know.
You don't know. So
They haven't brought this
are
in.
you
So,
bringing them
go
forth?
ahead, Mr.
We don't.
Go ahead, Marcus.
But, yeah.
Because I would recommend that you do.
Well,
so
we
that
will be doing that, but
officially-
they'll-
that we
I don't know if it'll
officially
be next
approve
week.
them.
No,
Oh, you
Rob, we
have
haven't
to
seen
be
the
next
agenda yet,
week.
but we'll
I don't
explain
The
it in
first thing was to
process.
make sure that we brought the job descriptions
First.
forth on Tuesday so that you can review them and
Okay.
First.
give us your blessing. Then we'd seek to fill them, and then we'd bring certificated candidates to you to approve.
The job description will come first from now on.
Correct.
So on these positions, you'll get the job description first. You see this here, what we're asking for.
But I'm saying we would approve the positions.
Yes.
On
Correct.
on
Right.
our next
Personnel
agenda,
report.
so you
Yes.
can move forward. That's
Right.
what I'm asking.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
The
per
first
the
part
board
is the job
request.
Okay,
description, though.
on the 14th.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and that's what the board requested, that I bring
Right,
these forward
right.
to you. We're going to do that in the future.
Yes.
And then it's going to be a meeting process. We'll bring them forward. You'll see the job description. If there's any adjustments or changes, then we'll bring it back to next meeting, and then it will be it'll be part of the personnel report.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think we're at next steps.
Okay,
Yeah.
so somebody turn off Doc's mic. Okay, so next steps, next Tuesday, we'll be bringing the first interim submission to the board for approval. It's due to the county by December 15th. We look forward to Governor Newsom's proposal on the 10th of January, and then we will have a subsequent budget workshop with School Services of California to go through the details and flush out the impacts to our budget. And then we are, again, beginning our budget preparation for 22-23. And so the SIPS and budget development training will begin on January 20th. And then lastly, we expect to come back to the board in February to walk the board through the governor's budget proposal and include information about the impacts to our district. And with that, thank you.
Dr. Wyatt?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just, I haven't said much tonight, but just want to thank Harold and your team, first of all, for the presentation, as well as Executive Cabinet, Doc as well, Superintendent. Looking forward to good news, as some of us are finding out tonight, and in January and February, and I think we could do a lot more planning after that. And I really do appreciate, the clarity and transparency on the positions that have been kind of, questioned in the past. And makes it easy for us to make a decision and move forward. I'm looking forward to us filling those positions, and so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So if there are no other comments, ditto, ditto, ditto. I know it's holiday season time, but you all turned it around on a dime, and I appreciate it. And that is very helpful for all of us to be able to know all of the information. And so having said that, I am now going to go to closing out adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. And board members, I don't, if you did, I know, if you're, okay, if you haven't done your board self-evaluation, send it, because she put it in a printable document for you, so. Oh, really? Oh, gosh, okay.